We are just going to get prepped for our final unit test for AP World History. You guys have made it, so good job. This is Unit 6B. We did not have a study guide for this one, but here are the main things that you want to make sure that you know for this test. First of all, as you're looking at this, we want to look at what some of the changes politically and socially happened in Russia. Now, you wrote a change over time essay on this, so you should be pretty familiar with it. But as we're looking, we want to make sure that we understand kind of the end of the Romanov dynasty. And we're going to see that happen as we are looking at Tsar Nicholas II. He's going to take control in 1894. We know a major event that happened is going to be Bloody Sunday in 1905, where people are going to march on the city, kind of demanding change, and he was not very responsive. They actually shot at the crowd and killed many people, and so people were not very happy at all, in addition to already not being happy. We know that there's two major revolutions that we want to be familiar with. The February Revolution that obviously happened in February of 1917, and this is where Nicholas is actually going to give up the throne. He's going to abdicate, and then we're going to move to a provisional government for a period of time with Kerensky. And so that's going to take place for a while. But what's going to be happening as we kind of look at this, they're still involved with World War I, and that's one of the things that people were not happy with. This is backtracking a lot, but we know that they wanted to be out of World War I. We have a second revolution then, and we've talked about how silly it is that the calendars are different, but the October Revolution, and this is where Germans, because once again they are fighting against Germany, helped bring Lenin, who was actually in exile outside of Russia, helped bring him back, and he is actually going to get popular support. He's going to take control in the October Revolution, and it is going to take them out of World War I. So major things that you kind of are looking at there. As we're looking at the rule of Lenin, if we look through the years that he's ruling, we see some of the major policies as a new economic policy. We're going to see that he's going to have some market economy, but government is still going to control, right here, industry and banks. So they're still very state-controlled with industrialization. We know that they're going to focus, because of that, on technical schools and people being educated in that way. So those are linked together. But you want to be able to say, like, if I know one thing about Lenin, I understand how he came to control. If we know the October Revolution, and you want to be familiar with what he did while he was in control, especially the new economic policy. We then know about Stalin. Joseph Stalin is important that you are familiar with. He's in your flashcards as well, but if you were to say a few key words about him, you'd want to remember that he was a very authoritarian ruler, that he had the 5-year plans, he collectivized agriculture and industry, and then he's also very famous for being a terrible ruler in how he treated people. And so the Great Purge or the Terror, these are going to be those incidences where he's going to treat people terribly. And so those are some of the changes. We move from the Romanov dynasty into a period where it turns communist in Russia. And the key leaders you want to make sure that you're aware of is Lenin and Stalin during this time. Now, China is also going to have changes that happens there. If you kind of go through the whole Chinese dynasty song, the key thing you want to remember is the last dynasty is the Qing dynasty. They are going to be the ones that are at the end, if you go through the song. After that, we're going to go into a state of a republic right here. And that is going to be led by Sun Yat-sen. We've talked about him before, but we do know that there's going to be this event where there's going to be a civil war between nationalists and communists within China. And people, remember, liked the communists because of the things that they were able to do. Because most people were really upset as peasants that the government was not taking care of them. There was a lot of famine, and they helped solve some of those issues. In addition to, they were able to kind of push the Japanese out. And so we see the conflict that happens between China and the Japanese. Now, the other two key leaders after Sun Yat-sen is also going to be the two we want, Mao Zedong. He's going to start the People's Republic of China. We know that this is communist, so when we say it's modeled after the Soviets, they're going to follow kind of what the Soviets did years before. And so they're also going to have 5-year plans. They are also going to collectivize agriculture. Later on, he's going to have, this is a big one, the Great Leap Forward, which was not so great and not really leaping forward. But that is going to be a program that he does to try to help spur on kind of their development, as well as the Cultural Revolution. This is when we talked about Mao's Red Book and how a lot of students were involved in this, really kind of tearing down their old values of valuing kind of the people that went before them and their parents and kind of those within society that are more mature. And this was against this. And so Mao got a lot of support by young people through this. So Mao ruled for quite a period of time. Upon his death, Deng Xiaoping, which is the other one, so three people here, Sun Yat-sen, if you're looking up here, Mao Zedong, and Deng Xiaoping. You want to know what the differences are between each of these? And Deng Xiaoping is going to come into control, but he is going to maintain communism within China, but he's going to bring in, here's the key thing, market reforms. He's going to open up China and allow them into the global market. They're going to start friendly relations with the United States. And so as we talked about the kind of this opening up, we know that other ideas then came to China. And these new ideas is going to lead to Tiananmen Square, where people are asking for more reforms in the government. And this will end up where we see those famous iconic pictures with the tanks rolling in on the streets, big protests that happened here, big event. And so while Deng Xiaoping opened up China, he was opposed to different ideas compared to communism. So you want to know those three people. Kind of the end was the Qing. You want to know that they went to a republic. And as you go into the song, Republic, Mao Zedong, and then our little extra new part, Deng. So that's changes that happened in China. Now this is going to make us move into the Cold War. And we want to remember about the Cold War, some of the different causes for it. Remember the Cold War is going to emerge after, it's going to be post-World War II. And there's really only two superpowers left, which is going to be the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And so with these two left, we have two superpowers. Everyone else is kind of in shambles and rebuilding. And so because of this, we have different causes of conflict between these two countries, which you're going to find over here. So first of all, competing ideologies. We kind of see the differences between the United States and the Soviet Union. The U.S., as you kind of split these in half here, the U.S. embracing capitalism and democracy. So capitalist is an economic system and democracy is a political system, whereas the Soviet Union is going to embrace socialism and communism. Socialism is we're looking at the economic system and communism politically. We also know there's resentment between these two countries. Once again, we know that the Soviet Union kind of made this non-aggression pact with Germany, and then that didn't work out so well, and they still got attacked by Germany, so they were out and rejoined on the other side during the war. But we also know that the United States tried to get involved with the Russian Revolution and didn't want them to go communist. So they are not friends here, and so you want to make sure you know that. We also know that the United States initially has the atomic bomb first, but the Soviets will get it a few years later, and so you know that. We also know that when we're looking at Germany, you can add another one here that we had in our notes, and as we're looking at the division of both West and East Germany, and we see kind of a microcosm of this with the city of Berlin. So just be familiar with that as well. So those are the different causes. You want to know all of these terms, which is really important as you're studying. We want to know that the Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall, not the same thing. Iron Curtain is the invisible barrier, not an actual wall, the invisible barrier between those that are kind of within the U.S. sphere of influence and the Soviet sphere of influence. So that's kind of an invisible line that goes through Eastern Europe, and kind of what side of that line are you on? So that invisible barrier. Obviously, the Berlin Wall is what was built in the city of Berlin that separated out East and West Berlin. The reason that it was built, as you kind of remember that, is to keep people from migrating into West Berlin, those that were controlled by the United States. And so the Soviet Union didn't want people kind of going in there. And so there's kind of like intellectual and people drain, if you will, of losing good people to the other side. So they built the wall more so that people could not get into the United States and the Western sphere of influence within the city of Berlin. The Marshall Plan, I put this on here on purpose with the dollar signs. This is where they're economically supporting. We see this mostly with the two countries of Greece and Turkey. They want to make sure that these countries don't fall into the influence of the Soviet sphere of influence. As we go back over here, the Truman Doctrine is really the doctrine of containment. We don't want it to spread because we're afraid of, going back to the domino theory, that if one country falls, they're all going to fall. And then these two over here that you guys see, these are going to be the different military alliances that are formed after World War II. NATO being the Western and the U.S. supported, whereas the Warsaw Pact is going to be kind of their response to NATO. That's going to be the Soviet Union. So two military alliances that are formed. So those are all keywords you want to know about the Cold War. And then we want to know when the Cold War got hot, basically. When was it a hot war instead of just a Cold War where there was no fighting? So we know the first time was the Korean War. We know that this is, and this is a big one right here, just in case you forgot from class. So the first time that the UN Security Council votes, here's the keyword, to get involved post-World War II. Now we know that the Soviet Union had a seat, but at this time they were boycotting the Security Council, and so they weren't there to vote, and so they were able to get in a vote of one person abstaining. The Soviet Union weren't there, but then everyone else supported getting involved in the Korean War, and that's kind of how that happened. So the UN Security Council gets involved. We know that North Korea pushed into South Korea, tried to basically take it over as a communist country. South Korea pushed back, and plus more. We know that we did that originally with the UN forces. They kind of pushed and got a little greedy, but at the end, they pushed back, and then we end in an armistice. We're going to talk peace. There was, and this is kind of a big thing, no peace treaty. They just stopped fighting. And so, I ran out of room there, no peace treaty. And so when we're looking at that, we want to make sure that you are familiar that there was not one. They just had an armistice. They agreed to stop fighting, that's what that means. Agreed to stop fighting and talk peace. And they then separated again at the same spot. So we had them move one way, then move the other way, and then we came back to the middle. Cuban Missile Crisis, we know that this is going to be between when Castro takes control in Cuba, Fidel Castro. Khrushchev is going to step in, and we know that together that they're both communists. Castro said he's always been a communist, and this is going to be against JFK. Very tense time. The U.S. gets involved, tries to overthrow Castro at the Bay of Pigs invasion. They help train people. They go on in. It fails. And so that's when the Soviet Union agrees that they're going to send nuclear missiles to help Cuba protect itself. And then the United States responds, hey, NIMBY, not in my backyard. And so there's this really tense time with what's going to happen. And then at the end of the day, as we said, the Soviet Union blinked first because people knew that we would have mutually assured destruction if this thing were to kind of go off. And then finally, which you'll learn more about in American history, the Vietnam War. Once again, similar situations. We have North Vietnam having an alliance, once again, with the Soviet communist countries, as well as then South Vietnam and the United States making an alliance with them. There was opposition to Ho Chi Minh, key name you want to know there, leader of North Vietnam, someone who is communist. And so we have a crazy, really difficult war that cost a lot of people's lives that was not successful, and that's kind of not so great for the United States. And it's seen as one of those things that kind of is, I can't believe that we couldn't win Vietnam. But once again, we know guerrilla warfare tactics. And as we're looking at kind of the weaponry that's used, we kind of continue to see that it is increasingly targeted at civilians many times, or at least not really caring about civilians, and at the same time causing a lot more death. The Soviet Union had their own Vietnam, if we were to call it that, and that's going to be the Soviet War in Afghanistan. And so also very long and not very successful. They eventually are going to leave, as we talked about this. We know this connection that's going to come later on with Osama bin Laden. But the U.S. is not going to be boots on the ground here. They are just going to send weapons. So the U.S. sends weapons to support the Mujahideen who fought against the Soviets. So you want to make sure that you're familiar with that. Now, the Brezhnev Doctrine is basically the opposite of Truman's Doctrine, and it called for the use of the Warsaw Pact, so this is that military alliance, that they said that anytime any countries in the Eastern Bloc, so we're looking at Eastern Europe, anytime that they were maybe trying to think and not be communist, so if anyone forces the Warsaw Pact, that military alliance, to intervene in any Eastern Bloc nation which has seemed to compromise communist rule. If, let's say, they're thinking about democracy, Brezhnev says we're coming in. And a key example of that is Prague Spring in 1968, where they send in troops to Prague, which was in Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic today, and they want to put down this movement. And so, not great for Prague. But once again, Brezhnev's doctrine, he's the guy also that led the Soviet war. He's kind of a military leader of all these, and he puts these things down. So that's kind of key things to know about the Soviet Union when things got hot. Détente is going to be the cooling period. The cooling period. This is when they're going to have the SALT talks, Strategic Arms Limitation talks. And that's going to go on for a period where people are going to decrease weaponry, especially nuclear weapons. And then we have it kind of amped up again with when Reagan comes and he kind of comes out and says the USSR is the evil empire. We're going to give that quotes. So the evil empire. He is also the one that's going to speak at the Brandenburg Gate and tell Gorbachev to tear down this wall. And so we see lots of this continue on for quite some time. So basically, from the end of World War II all the way up till 1991 when the Soviet Union collapses. So let's talk about how that happened. We know that Mikhail Gorbachev is going to be the leader. He's first of all going to be kind of the party for the Communist Party. He's going to be the general secretary, kind of like the head of that. In addition, he will later then be the country's head of state from 88 to 91. And so he is a head kind of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party for quite some time. He's very influential. And if you have to know, and you want to know both of these for the test, you want to know which one is perestroika and which one's glasnost. So perestroika is restructuring. So this is about the economy and how the economy operates. Glasnost is about openness, about transparency. It's trying to get rid of, can't spell, transparency. You get the point, everyone. There we go. It's a way. Openness, transparency. We want to get rid of corruption. So they want to get rid of government corruption. They want to be more open. And so these are two reforms led by Gorbachev. Later on, people are thinking that he is destroying the Soviet Union. And so we talked about the coup that happens in August. They kind of keep him in his vacation home in the Crimea. He says, no, I'm not going to step down. There's this whole incident back in town when people are telling him that Gorbachev, what's happening. They don't tell him that he's under duress, but they say, follow us, and the government did not do so. And so military troops didn't know who to follow. People, ultimately, this is where Boris Yeltsin is going to kind of come on the scene. He, at this time, is the president of Russia. So, and just to kind of clarify, just so you guys know, so the Soviet Union, as we are looking at the Soviet Union, you want to make sure that you understand what that means. And so when we're talking, this is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So ultimately, this is not the real map, but there are different states within there. They're not like a field system, but you get what I'm saying. And so we have independence. So we have Russia as one of the socialist republics within the greater Soviet Union. Kind of think like states. That's probably more familiar. So we have Russia. He is the president of Russia in the greater Soviet Union. Now, the Soviet Union will he'll kind of be the guy that after this coup and after we have some of these military issues, we see that Yeltsin kind of became big and well known after this event that happens, and he is going to be the one that then will, as all of the countries become independent countries, no longer part of the Soviet Union. So we just have Russia and we just have all the other countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union become independent countries. And he is going to finalize these two things. He is going to help dissolve the Soviet Union once and for all, and that happens in 1991. And he's going to embrace free market economy or capitalism. And so this is the day, if you want to know when the Cold War ended, this is really the thing that we talk about, when the Soviet Union collapsed. A few other things we wanted to make sure you guys know. So that's everything on the Cold War. I know this is a lot of stuff, but if you guys know that stuff, you'll be in good shape. Then you want to know kind of the key things about these other movements. So India's independence, we know that they are once controlled by the British. We know that our key leader, you have to know for the test, is Gandhi, and you want to know a little bit about him. What were his methods? Where did he study? Kind of that defining moment when he's in South Africa. That he wanted a unified India. He wanted Muslims and Hindus to be able to work together. And so he worked together with Nehru. He's down here, they're friends. But he is later going to be assassinated. So all those key things you want to know about Gandhi, biggest things that he used: nonviolence, civil disobedience. We know that Jinnah did not agree. We saw these two different viewpoints between these two. Jinnah wanted a separate state, and we know that this is how the creation of Pakistan happened, where they partitioned the two when they created both independent states. So not only is this India's independence, it is also Pakistan. Oh, hello. Pakistan. I'm hitting the wrong buttons on here. There we go. And Pakistan's independence. So we'll kind of include that in there as well. Nehru, he'll become the first Prime Minister of India. He is going to be the father of Indira Gandhi, who's later going to be the first female Prime Minister of India. And then we want to look that he's going to be a key leader in this non-alignment movement. Countries that are not going to be aligned with either the U.S. or the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So we see that as well. So first female Prime Minister. Jewish state, we know the creation of Israel and why that happened. We know that Zionism, good word you need to know, desire for a Jewish homeland. We know that after World War I, because they used to be part of the Ottoman Empire, that the British had a mandate power over this region. We know that the Balfour Declaration, they said, hey, we support a Jewish state, and someday we're going to help you get that. They also kind of got other Palestinian support as well, and so they kind of double promised. Eventually, they stepped out of the whole thing and let the UN figure this out. And so the UN put forth a two-state solution. We should have a state of Israel, and we should have a state of Palestine. However, that didn't happen. A civil war broke out, and basically, it just became Israel and no Palestine. So we created a new country and not the other one. So the country that kind of was prior to and that was happening, and those people lost their country when the creation of Israel happened. You want to know key terms like the PLO and who they are, who it was led by. We want to know that in Camp David Summit, Bill Clinton almost, they agreed on a two-state solution, and it fell apart. So still today, we only have Israel, and we have a lot of humanitarian issues with the treatment of Palestinians. So controversial topics in today's history. South Africa, you want to remember that the Dutch and the British were both in that region, both imperialist. We know that the Dutch are going to move inland when the British take over the Cape Colony. They will be known as Boers or Afrikaners, which we know means white Africans. So that is important. And then we know that they're going to form the Afrikaner National Party. They are going to gain political control of the country. They are going to instate apartheid, which is going to be that legal separation of those who are white and black. And we know that a key leader for the African National Congress, key person you need to know, is Nelson Mandela. We know that he was jailed for 27 years at Robben Island. Technically there was two persons, but he was jailed for 27 years, most of it at Robben Island. And then later, Klerk is going to dismantle apartheid in 1990, which is crazy. similar times to when, just before the Cold War ends, just before the Soviet Union collapses. Then, in a major event also, he will become president in 1994. We mentioned the non-alignment movement before. This is on the test. You want to know this. That a first world country was those, the blue countries on here, those that were allied with the United States. Second world countries were those that were allied with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And then the non-alignment movie is these green countries. You can't see them. My circles everywhere. The green countries, they were neutral. They're non-aligned. A lot of times we hear the third world, we only think of developing countries, but this is technically where this word came from. Islam, we know that Islam is going to continue to spread in the Middle East. It's been there. It's kind of their history. And we know that Turkey and Iran are going to differ in how they, as modernization happens, and that's the key thing here. With modernization, what they do. And so Turkey is going to go more secular, more Western. We know that our key person here is Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, where Iran is going to move the opposite direction, more fundamentalist beliefs, Sharia law. They're going to overthrow Shah Reza, or the Shah. The Ayatollah Khomeini is going to be the one, the cleric, part of the ulama that's going to help lead this overthrow. And then we have what we know as the Iranian hostage crisis, where the United States starts to treat the Shah in the United States. They're going to take over the U.S. Embassy. Watch our go, and you're all good. Fundamentalism, then, we talked about, is kind of that literal interpretation of their religious text, but we know that it also is usually militant. And so, this kind of, if we trace back and you want to know the big thing, why did Osama bin Laden, who we once supported in the Soviet war in Afghanistan, we supported that side against the Soviets, why would he turn and hate us so much? Now, he's never really liked us, but we did give him weapons. And the biggest kind of key turning point is going to be when Saudi Arabia, when Saddam Hussein invades Iraq, and they're worried he was going to invade in Saudi Arabia, that the U.S. stepped in and offered support, as did bin Laden, and Saudi Arabia, his home country, said no to Osama bin Laden. And said yes to the